Benjamin and Miles had been climbing partners for years, a team known for tackling some of the toughest routes in the Sierra. But when they set their sights on El Capitan, something went terribly wrong. Both men vanished without a trace. Despite extensive search missions across the rugged terrain, no signs of them were ever found. Only a silent campsite, untouched, as if time had frozen. 3 years passed. Then, one ordinary morning, a casual walk turned into a discovery no one was ready for. A hiker named Riley Patel was out with their German Shepherd, Ranger, heading through a lesser-used route near El Capitan. They were familiar with the trail, but running late for work, Riley decided to take a shortcut, one rarely used due to last season's landslides. Ranger, trained in scent detection though never officially certified, darted ahead into a field of scattered boulders. Moments later, his bark cut through the air, sharp, urgent. Riley followed, climbing over a fallen tree to find the dog fixated on a massive split boulder. Ranger's body was tense, locked into the stance he'd been trained to take when he sensed something human. Riley expected a lost backpack or maybe some old gear, but when they shined their flashlight into the crack, the beam landed on something pale and unmistakable. Fabric, tangled with the outline of a rib cage, a faded jacket still clinging to it. Their heart pounded as they called emergency services. Meanwhile, 300 miles away in Fresno, Vera Wilder, Benjamin's sister, was sorting through paperwork when the knock came. It was Sheriff Boyd Tanner, someone she'd known since high school, standing on her porch with that expression no one ever wants to see. He took off his hat, spoke gently. Remains had been found near El Capitan. There was climbing gear nearby. Dental confirmation would take a bit, but the equipment matched what Miles Reeves had with him when he disappeared. Vera sat in silence. Relief and sorrow washed over her in equal measure. Miles was Benjamin's closest friend, more like a brother. They'd worked seasonal jobs, planned every trip together, and on that last morning, Benjamin had stopped by her house to drop off his spare keys, promising he'd be back by Sunday night. But Sunday never came. The Rangers later found their camp undisturbed, sleeping bags laid out, food untouched. It was as if the mountain had swallowed them whole. Now Vera was being asked to return, to help identify anything found with the body. As they drove toward Yosemite, Boyd explained, the area where the remains were found had been blocked off by landslides shortly after their disappearance. Search teams hadn't been able to access it until now, and no one was prepared for what else might be waiting there. Vera sat silently, watching the landscape shift outside the window, the flat stretch of the Central Valley giving way to rolling hills, then rising pines as they approached Yosemite. She had driven this route more times than she could count, always dropping Benjamin off for his climbs, always picking him up sunburned, tired, but smiling like he'd just conquered the world. At the ranger station, Sheriff Boyd handed her off to a parked vehicle better equipped for the rugged path ahead. As they bounced along the uneven trail, El Capitan rose into view, its towering granite face glowing under the afternoon sun. The site was bigger than she expected. Yellow tape marked off a wide section of the boulder field. Investigators in Park Service uniforms moved carefully between rocks, taking photos and tagging items. A young ranger with a German Shepherd stood nearby, visibly shaken. Boyd led Vera to a small command post, a temporary tent filled with equipment and evidence bags. Inside, a woman with a tightly pulled bun looked up from her clipboard. "This is Vera Wilder," Boyd said gently. "She's Benjamin's sister." The woman's face softened. "Lieutenant Chen, thank you for being here. We've recovered several items that might help confirm the identity." On a table lay a series of clear bags, a weather-worn blue jacket torn at the shoulder, a climbing harness dulled by dirt, and a water-damaged wallet. Vera picked it up and could just make out the ID through the plastic. It was Miles Reeves. His picture smiled faintly back, hair falling over his forehead like it always had. "That's Miles," she said quietly. steadying her voice despite the grief rising in her throat. That's his gear. He had that harness made custom in Denver. Chen nodded, making notes. The remains suggest a fall, maybe triggered by rock movement. We'll know more after the examination. And Benjamin? Vera asked. Are you still searching? We've got teams in the area, Chen replied. The terrain has shifted a lot over the years, but we're covering everything. If he's there, we'll find him. She paused. I know this isn't easy, but do you remember anything they might have mentioned about their planned route? Any details from that morning? Vera closed her eyes. Benjamin kept a climbing journal. It's still at his place. Mine now, I guess. I couldn't bring myself to clean it out. I paid his rent for 6 months after he went missing. That journal could help us, Chen said gently. Anything to narrow the area. Just then, Vera noticed movement above. A man on horseback was coming down the trail, several cattle trailing behind him. Even from a distance, he looked experienced, sitting tall in the saddle, moving with the ease of someone who'd spent a lifetime outdoors. He approached slowly, guiding the horse down the rocky path. Vera could see now. He was in his 50s, sun-weathered skin, strong build, rolled sleeves, and a tan hat that shaded silver-streaked hair. Afternoon, Vernon, Boyd greeted. The man tipped his hat and dismounted with ease. His gaze swept the scene, the investigators, the yellow tape, the evidence tent. I heard helicopters earlier, he said, his voice calm but concerned. Something serious? Boyd nodded. Hiker found remains, likely one of the climbers from a few years back. Vernon's face tightened with sympathy. He removed his hat fully now. The 2 young men, I remember the search. This is Vera Wilder, Boyd said. Her brother was one of them. Vernon offered a firm, calloused handshake. Vernon Hartley. I run the ranch that borders this part of the park. I'm so sorry for your loss. Up close, Vera could see the way he stood. Upright, balanced, like a man who once wore a uniform. Thank you, she replied softly. Turning to Boyd, Vernon said, This the same area we searched back then? Close, Boyd replied, but the landslides changed the terrain. It's not what it was. Vernon nodded. That winter was brutal. My ranch hands move cattle through here all the time. We know every trail and water source around. If you need help, my men are available. Lieutenant Chen stepped closer. We'd appreciate that. Familiar eyes can spot things we might miss. I've got 6 hands working now, all experienced. They'll go where you need them, Vernon replied. He looked at Vera again. Your brother, Benjamin, right? The blonde one. Yes, Vera said, caught off guard. I remember him. Stood out on the posters, healthy athletic type, probably mid-20s? 23, she said, her voice tight. 24 when he vanished, Vera said softly. No wife, no kids. He lived for the mountains. Vernon gave a slow nod, thoughtful. Some young men leave it all behind when life gets heavy. Responsibilities, expectations. But that wasn't your brother. No, she replied firmly. He wasn't running from anything. Sheriff Boyd added, We looked into every possibility back then. Nothing suggested he'd ever just walk away. These 2 were skilled climbers, but they weren't reckless. Something went wrong out here. Vernon adjusted his hat and looked Vera in the eye. Well, my team will keep watch. We move cattle through these trails all season. If there's anything out there, we'll see it. He hesitated, then asked, Where was Benjamin originally from? Fresno, Vera answered, but he spent every spare moment in the wilderness. You from an athletic family too? No, climbing was Benjamin's thing. I liked the ground under my feet. Vernon's face cracked into a small smile. Smart. These mountains are stunning, but they don't forgive mistakes. He clicked his tongue, gathering the reins. If you need extra help, you've got it. Call me anytime. With practiced ease, he mounted his horse, tipping his hat again before heading out, the cattle trailing behind him as he guided them gently away from the investigation site. Good man, Vernon Hartley, Boyd said quietly once he was out of earshot. Owns the biggest ranch in the county, borders the park for miles, knows this land better than most rangers ever will. He's ex-military too, Army Corps of Engineers. If there's anyone who can help find your brother, it's him. They stayed at the site a while longer. Vera answered questions about Benjamin and Miles, what gear they preferred, how they planned routes, what they usually carried. By the time the sun dipped behind El Capitan, Boyd suggested it was time to head back. The drive home was quiet. Vera stared out the window, thinking about Miles's family up in Oregon. Someone would have to call them. At least now, they might have some answers. When they reached her driveway, Boyd turned to her. "Try to rest. We'll call you as soon as we learn anything new. And that climbing journal you mentioned, if you find it, it could help." "I'll look tonight," she promised. But sleep didn't come. Every time Vera closed her eyes, she saw that faded ID card and the image of Benjamin's untouched tent flashing in her mind. By dawn, she gave up. With coffee in hand, she sat at her kitchen table, watching the sun slowly light up the valley. She needed to stay focused. The search was back on, and she could help. She'd created missing person flyers 3 years ago, rushed and desperate, printed in the middle of the night at a copy center. This time it would be different. She stepped into Benjamin's old room. It still held the scent of him, sunscreen, climbing chalk, and cedar sachets their mom always used in drawers. At his desk, she began to search, looking for the envelope of photos from his last trip to Joshua Tree. Everything was just as he'd left it. Pens scattered, half-eaten protein bar in the wrapper, crumpled receipts. Then she saw it, a manila folder labeled "work stuff" in his familiar handwriting. Inside were pay stubs from part-time jobs, construction, holiday retail, warehouse shifts. The usual. But 3 stubs stood out, clipped together. Hartley Ranch. Vera's eyes narrowed. The most recent payment, dated just 18 days before Benjamin disappeared. $1,200 for fencing work. Cash. 2 more stubs showed similar work in August and early September, all signed by the same person, Vernon Hartley. Vera stared at the papers, her pulse picking up. Her brother had worked for Vernon for at least a month before he vanished, and yet Vernon hadn't said a word about knowing him. Was it possible he simply forgot? Dozens of seasonal workers might have come and gone over the years. 2 young men could blend in, but he had remembered Benjamin was blonde, had called him athletic, outdoorsy. She opened another box. There was the photo she'd been looking for, Benjamin standing on the summit of Half Dome, grinning wide. And more followed, Benjamin and Miles at their campsite, headlamps glowing in the twilight. Vera held the photo tighter. Something didn't add up. And now she wasn't just grieving. She had questions, real ones. A video on Benjamin's old phone played on loop in Vera's mind. The 2 of them goofing around on a boulder, Miles narrating in a mock documentary voice. Here we observe the rare Benjamin Wilder in his natural habitat. They were vibrant, young, alive in a way that made it hard to believe what had happened. Vera printed the clearest photos and headed to Yosemite Village. The climbing shop buzzed with hikers and weekend climbers stocking up. Derek, the owner, spotted her the moment she walked in. He'd helped with the original search effort. "I heard," he said quietly. "I'm really sorry." "They're still looking for Benjamin," she replied, showing him the flyers. "Can I post one?" "Absolutely," Derek said, clearing space on the community board. Then, almost hesitating, he added, "You know, I always had a hunch they might have tried an alternate route that day. When Benjamin came in that week, he mentioned the East Buttress. Did he say anything else? Was anyone else going with them?" Derek shook his head. "Just the 2 of them. But Miles did ask about a shortcut from the valley floor. Said a rancher had shown them a trail that cut across private land. Saved about an hour." "A rancher?" Vera's breath caught. "Yeah, I think they were doing some work out that way. Fence repairs, maybe. There aren't many ranches that border the park up there." He paused. "Hartley Ranch is probably the biggest." Vera thanked him and headed straight for the ranger station. Inside, a young ranger named Kim pulled up the original missing persons report. "We talked to everyone who saw them that week," she said, frowning. "But there's nothing about them working near the park." "They were," Vera replied firmly. "I found the pay stubs, Hartley Ranch, 3 of them." Kim's face shifted. That should have been in the file. Vernon Hartley helped coordinate the initial search. If they were working for him, he would have known. Maybe he forgot, Vera offered. Kim didn't look convinced. Vernon's sharp, military background runs that place like clockwork. He doesn't forget things. On the drive home, that same uneasy feeling kept growing. It wasn't just the omission. People forget things all the time. But it was the way Vernon had asked questions. Personal ones. Benjamin's age, his relationship status, where he was from, as if trying to profile him without showing his hand. And then there was Benjamin's journal. He hadn't just worked at Hartley Ranch, he'd written about it. "Vernon seems like a decent boss," he wrote, present tense. So why had Vernon acted like he'd never met him? That night, Vera spread everything out on her dining table. Journal entries, photos, pay stubs, her notes. One thing was undeniable. Vernon Hartley had known her brother. Her brother had worked for him multiple times, had even taken trail advice from him. Yet Vernon had stood there yesterday, offering condolences, shaking her hand, and never once said a word about any of it. It wasn't proof of anything, just a troubling silence, but Vera couldn't let it go. Something didn't sit right. 3 days passed. She stayed busy helping coordinate search efforts, answering questions, checking maps. Still no sign of Benjamin. Lieutenant Chen remained hopeful. The terrain was brutal. The landslides had buried entire sections of the slope. It could take weeks to get answers. But Vera wasn't waiting anymore. She decided to go to Hartley Ranch herself. Maybe he had nothing to hide. Maybe he'd just forgotten. Or maybe he hadn't. The drive wound through 20 miles of twisting mountain roads. She'd looked the property up online. 3,000 acres of high country pasture land. Ranch buildings nestled beneath granite peaks. The ranch was beautiful. Everything neat, purposeful. Stone pillars marked the gated entrance, a metal arch overhead bearing the Hartley brand. Cattle grazed peacefully as she drove past. The house stood tall on a rise, porch wrapped all the way around, with views stretching to the distant ridgelines. But as she parked and climbed the front steps, something felt still, too still. No other vehicles, no movement. She rang the bell, heard it echo inside, waited, rang again. Nothing. She circled around the back. Another porch, a fenced garden, and what looked like an old bunkhouse. Still no sign of anyone. It was well past 10 a.m. On a working ranch, someone should be up, moving, tending to chores. Back at her car, Vera paused. She'd driven all this way, and Vernon Hartley, the man who hadn't mentioned knowing her brother, wasn't answering the door. But one way or another, she was getting answers. Leaving without at least trying to find Vernon felt wrong. He'd mentioned having a team of ranch hands. Surely someone had to be around. Vera slowly turned onto a dirt road that wound deeper into the property. She passed by storage sheds, a massive barn, and a sleek stable complex. Everything was impeccably kept, fresh paint, tools neatly arranged. Vernon clearly ran a tight operation. A narrower road branched off toward some older-looking buildings, tucked deeper into the hills. She followed it, guessing the workers might be out there. That's when she saw it. Vernon's truck, a dark blue Ford F-350 she remembered from the search site, was parked beside a low concrete structure partially built into a hillside. It didn't look like a storage shed. It looked fortified. Thick concrete walls, a reinforced metal door with multiple locks. Ventilation pipes stuck out from the earth above it, and a security camera blinked red on a nearby pole. Vera parked at a distance and stepped out. "Mr. Hartley," she called. "It's Vera Wilder." No response. She approached slowly, taking in the structure. The design reminded her of Cold War-era bunkers she'd seen in documentaries. Heavy, weathered. The few high windows had been sealed with metal plates. She circled the building once. It was silent except for a faint, low sound. Maybe machinery running inside? A generator? No cell signal, typical in the mountains. Still, She decided to wait a few more minutes. Vernon had to be close. Those tire tracks were fresh, and the truck was here. But something about the place gnawed at her. Why would a cattle ranch need a building like this? Maybe it was built long ago for something unrelated to livestock. Some of these older properties had unusual histories. Then she heard it again. A sound, clearer this time. A voice. It was Vernon. His voice carried through the ventilation grate near the ground. She crouched next to it, holding her breath. "I told you about resisting," he said calmly, like someone trying to explain a rule for the 100th time. 3 years, and you still haven't learned. Then, metal, the chilling clink of chains against concrete. A second voice, hoarse, broken. "Please, I can't, not anymore." Vernon again, his tone cool, controlled. "You need to accept this is your life now. Fighting it only makes things worse." A sob broke through. Not the kind that comes from frustration. A deep, raw cry that carried years of hopelessness. "Stop that," Vernon snapped. "Take your medicine or no food again. You know the rules." I'll take it, the man begged. "Just please, don't leave me here again." Vernon's answer was ice cold. "That depends entirely on you." Then footsteps, getting closer. Vera bolted. Her heart thundered in her chest as she scrambled back to her car. She fumbled with the keys, trying to breathe evenly, trying to act calm. The heavy door never opened, but she didn't wait to find out more. She drove, steadily, not speeding, but her hands wouldn't stop shaking. A mile from the ranch gate, she pulled over and dug out Sheriff Boyd Tanner's card, dialed his direct number with trembling fingers. He picked up on the third ring. "Boyd, it's Vera. I was just at Hartley Ranch," she said, trying to control her voice. "There's a building. He has someone locked inside." "Wait, slow down. What did you hear?" She explained everything. Vernon's voice, the sound of chains, the pleading, the reinforced structure. Boyd was quiet as she spoke. "You're telling me Vernon Hartley is holding someone on his property in a bunker? Not a storage shed, Boyd. This place is built into the hillside. I heard the chains. I heard someone crying, begging." There was a pause. Then Boyd replied carefully, "Vera, you've been under so much stress. You've barely slept. You found out about Miles. You've been helping with the search. I'm not saying you didn't hear something, but we have to be sure." And just like that, Vera heard the tone in his voice shift, the voice cops used with emotional witnesses, the one that meant they weren't quite believing you yet. But Vera knew what she'd heard, and someone was still inside that building. "I know what I heard," Vera said, but the sheriff's voice on the other end was calm, almost too calm. "I'm not saying you didn't hear something, but Vernon Hartley, he's one of the most respected people in this county. Donates to schools, bought new rescue equipment last year. People trust him. What you're describing, it could be anything." He offered explanations. Maybe Vernon was caring for an older relative. Maybe it was a worker going through a rough patch. "I don't have legal grounds to search private property," he added. "Without direct evidence, I can't do anything." So that was it, her word versus his reputation. "I understand," Vera said quietly. "Go home, get some rest. I'll make a few quiet inquiries. But you need to be cautious. Vernon's got powerful friends." The call ended. Vera sat there for a long time, watching the ranch entrance in her rearview mirror. She wasn't followed. Vernon probably never even knew she'd been there, but she knew what she'd heard. And someone was in that bunker. That night, Vera made a decision. She dug through the garage and found Benjamin's old trail camera, motion activated, night vision capable, the kind used to capture wildlife on remote trails. If the sheriff needed evidence, she'd get it. At 2 a.m., dressed in black, she returned to Hartley Ranch. The moon was new, the sky pitch dark, perfect for hiding, difficult for navigating. But she already knew the layout. Driving slowly with her lights off, she parked near a cluster of pines about 100 yards from the bunker. Vernon's truck wasn't there. Good. She crept toward a tall pine tree with a clear line of sight to the bunker door. Strapping the camera in place, she worked fast but carefully, Just one more adjustment and she'd be done. Then her flashlight caught something unexpected. Through the truck's rear window, magazines, dozens of them. And not just any magazines, fitness publications with bare-chested men arranged neatly across the seat. On the dashboard, a small brown bottle glinted in the moonlight, something she recognized from college, a detail that made her stomach turn. Suddenly, the questions Vernon had asked her about Benjamin's age, his looks, his private life, made an awful kind of sense. And then, "Couldn't leave well enough alone, could you?" She spun around. Vernon was 10 feet away. His voice was calm, but his stance wasn't. He wasn't the polite man from the investigation anymore. He was alert, composed, dangerous. "I was just—" Before she could finish, he lunged. One hand clamped over her mouth, the other wrapped around her waist, pulling her off balance. Vera fought back, twisting, kicking, panicking. Then she bit down hard on his hand, hard enough to draw blood. He shouted and pulled back. She broke free. Vera ran, hard hammering, hands fumbling in the dark for her phone. Her fingers hit the emergency dialer out of instinct. Boots thundered behind her, pounding the gravel. She saw her car, yanked the door open, fell inside, slammed the lock just as Vernon reached her. The phone rang once, twice. 911, what's your emergency? "I'm at Hartley Ranch," Vera gasped. "On Mountain Road. Vernon Hartley is—" She didn't get to finish. A crash exploded beside her. The driver's side window shattered as a crowbar punched through it. Glass scattered across her lap, sparkling under the moonlight. She screamed, instinctively shielding her face. "He's attacking me!" she cried out. "Hartley Ranch, please send help!" Through the broken window, Vernon reached in, trying to unlock the door. Vera snatched her phone from the floor, holding it tight. "Vernon Hartley is attacking me," she yelled again. He found the lock. The door flew open. He grabbed her by the hair and dragged her from the vehicle. Her phone flew from her hands into the darkness. Somewhere, faint and tinny, she could still hear the dispatcher's voice. Ma'am, are you there? Units are responding." "You'll see your brother real soon," Vernon muttered. His tone was cold, purposeful. Should have stayed out of this. Should have moved on. Zip ties were in his hand, quick, practiced, tight around her wrists. Then he lifted her like she weighed nothing and tossed her into the back of his truck. Her head struck metal. Light flashed in her vision. The truck started. Gravel kicked up behind the wheels. It wasn't far. Within minutes, Vernon pulled up in front of the same concrete building Vera had seen earlier that day. He left the headlights on, flooding the area in stark white. He opened the truck bed, hauled her out, and dragged her toward the heavy door. Locks clanked one by one. The door creaked open. A wave of staleness and rot hit her, like air that hadn't been fresh in years. "Move!" He pushed her forward. Stairs led underground, bathed in a sick green glow from backup lights. She stumbled into a space larger than expected, lined with supplies, food, water, medicine. Not just storage, preparation. But it wasn't the supplies that stopped her. It was what lay in the corner. A man, gaunt, filthy, unmoving, chained at the ankle, curled on a thin cot. At first, she didn't believe it, but then his head turned slightly, just enough. "Benjamin!" The name slipped out like breath. The figure turned more, eyes dull, vacant. A beard covered most of his face. His body was skeletal, scarred. "Ben, it's me. It's Vera." His lips moved, barely. One hand lifted as if trying to remember how. Vera took a step forward, only to feel cold metal snap around her ankle. Vernon was behind her, fastening a chain to a steel pipe. "You'll have plenty of time to catch up," he said. She looked down. The shackle was locked. She could sit. She could move a few feet, but not enough to reach her brother. "Ben," she whispered again. "Can you hear me?" His eyes met hers, empty, but there. A flicker of something deep beneath the surface. Vera's voice cracked. "What did you do to him?" "I took care of him," Vernon said. "I fed him, gave him music, books. He fought at first, but eventually he stopped." "You chained him in a bunker." "I saved him," Vernon insisted. "Out there, someone like him would have been used, broken. Here, he's safe. A sound in the distance. Engines. More than one. Vernon froze. You called them? He asked, already knowing the answer. They heard everything, Vera said. Your name. This place. What you did. His eyes narrowed. Then he turned and reached for something on the wall. A rifle. He moved with practiced calm, checking the magazine, flipping the safety. Then we don't have much time, he muttered. Vernon, stop. This is over. Let us go. Cooperate. And maybe... He didn't respond. The sound of vehicles grew louder. And in that moment, Vera knew. Whatever happened next would decide whether they ever left that bunker alive. Maybe what? Vernon snapped. Maybe I get 20 years instead of life? Maybe they lock me away where the others won't get to me? He let out a bitter laugh. I've spent a lifetime hiding. I won't end it in a cage. Outside, the engines were louder now. Dozens of vehicles had surrounded the bunker. Vernon stood between the siblings, rifle in hand, steady but not raised. Over the ventilation system, voices echoed, calm but commanding. This is the sheriff's department. Vernon Hartley, we know you're inside. We know you have Vera and Benjamin Wilder. Come out now with your hands visible. Vernon didn't move. He was calculating, focused. Vera saw the gears turning. The same strategic mind that built a 3,000-acre ranch, that hid his secret life, that orchestrated this underground prison. They'll breach, he muttered. Use gas, maybe a forced entry. Either way, someone's getting hurt. He looked at Benjamin, frail, barely conscious. He won't survive that kind of shock. Then let us go, Vera pleaded. It doesn't have to end like this. But Vernon only shook his head. It was never going to end quietly, not since his little friend barged into the bunkhouse. Miles thought he could threaten me, act like Benjamin hadn't been willing, like he hadn't taken my money, hadn't flirted first. I misread things. One mistake, and suddenly, I'm a criminal. His jaw clenched. He left me no choice. You ended his life, Vera said through gritted teeth. And I kept Benjamin's, Vernon replied, his voice softening. I never laid a hand on him in anger. I cared for him. When he cried, I held him. When he stopped eating, I begged him. That's not love, she said. What do you know about it? Vernon's voice cracked. 40 years of silence, watching the world move on while I stayed hidden. Then he came along, free, open, and I couldn't let him disappear like all the others. Suddenly, movement above, footsteps on the bunker's concrete roof. They're at the vents, Vernon said, raising his rifle. Boyd brought in SWAT. At least they're not underestimating me. Please, Vera said, nodding toward Benjamin. Look what you've done. This isn't safety. This isn't care. This is destruction. Before Vernon could answer, the lights went out. Then, population. A flashbang dropped through the vent. Vera squeezed her eyes shut. The world exploded. Light, sound, pressure. Even prepared, it felt like being punched by the air itself. Gunfire followed, not bullets, but the crack of tasers. Vernon cried out, convulsed, and fell to the floor, the rifle skidding away. Clear. 3 civilians, 2 restrained. Medics rushed in behind the tactical team. A voice near her. Ma'am, you're safe now. Bolt cutters snapped her chain. Vera couldn't focus. Her eyes were locked on Benjamin, surrounded by EMTs checking his pulse, starting IVs, gently lifting him onto a stretcher. Is he alive? Yes, one medic said, weak but stable. Lieutenant Chen appeared beside her. We've got him, Vera, and you too. You're safe. He was down there 3 years, Vera whispered. 3 years. Chen nodded. We know. Let's get you both the help you need. They walked up the stairs into a sea of flashing lights. Cruisers, ambulances, even a medical helicopter. Vernon, handcuffed, was already being loaded into a patrol vehicle. He looked smaller now, defeated, all the calculation gone from his face. The flight to the trauma center was a blur. Vera held Benjamin's hand, skeletal, fragile, but warm. His eyes never opened. He didn't speak, but his fingers curled around hers. Just slightly. I'm here, she whispered. You're safe. I've got you. The hospital room was quiet, except for the soft beeping of machines. Vera hadn't left his side in 2 days. He's physically stable, the doctor said. Malnourished, but recovering. The body will heal. She hesitated. The rest will take time. Vera reached for her brother's hand again. She didn't care how long it took. He was alive, and this time, she wasn't letting go. He hadn't spoken, not once. He responded to simple things: water, touch, familiar voices, and sometimes he'd look at Vera with something like recognition, but it never lasted. Selective mutism, Dr. Ningguan explained gently. Common after prolonged trauma. The fact that he's responsive at all is hopeful, but healing will take time. A knock interrupted them. Sheriff Boyd Tanner stepped in, followed by Lieutenant Chen. How's he doing? Physically stronger, Vera said, but mentally? Boyd nodded solemnly. That's why we're here. Vernon's been talking. A full confession. You deserve to hear what he said. Vera braced herself. Tell me. Chen opened her notebook. Your brother and Miles wrapped up work at the ranch in early September, but they came back on October 2nd, just to pick up some gear they'd left behind. Vernon was drunk. He made advances toward Benjamin in the bunkhouse. Benjamin said no. Vernon got aggressive. She paused, her voice even, but her eyes filled with disgust. Miles walked in. He saw what was happening and threatened to call the police. Vernon panicked, shot him with a .38 revolver, killed him instantly. Vera closed her eyes. Benjamin tried to run, Chen continued. Vernon struck him, knocked him unconscious, kept him sedated for 3 days while he got rid of the body. The rock slide, Vera whispered. Boyd nodded grimly. Vernon spent 2 decades in the Army Corps of Engineers, knew exactly how to use controlled explosives, buried Miles in a crevice, then triggered a slide that looked natural. It took another landslide 3 years later to expose it. But why keep Benjamin? Chen answered softly. He called it love. Classic delusional possession, she said. He'd been fixated on Benjamin since the day he hired him. Killing him felt like a waste. He believed, truly believed, that Benjamin would come to accept it. Vera stared at her brother's fragile form, the truth settling over her like ice. 3 years, she whispered. Chen nodded. The bunker was built back in 1962 by the ranch's original owner. Vernon updated it over time. Plumbing, ventilation, long-term supplies. Whether he admitted it or not, he'd been preparing for this. Dr. Ningguan added, that level of preparation, like it fits long-standing patterns. This wasn't his first victim. Chen looked up. No, it wasn't. He confessed to 7 assaults over the past 15 years. Young men, seasonal workers. He'd drug them, assault them, pay them to disappear. Most never reported it. They were isolated, scared. But Benjamin, he was different. Vernon said Benjamin was the one he'd waited for. Chen closed her notebook. Since news broke, 3 men have already come forward. We expect more. Vera's voice was barely audible. What happens now? Murder charges for Miles, unlawful imprisonment, assault, attempted murder of an officer, and everything else that comes from the other victims. He's never getting out. Boyd shifted, uneasy. Vera, I owe you an apology. When you called me, when you told me what you'd heard in that bunker, I didn't believe you. I let his reputation cloud my judgment. You couldn't have known. I should have followed up. If you hadn't placed that trail camera, she saved his life, Dr. Ningguan said quietly. Another year, maybe less, and his body would have shut down. The mind only survives so much. They spoke for a few more minutes about the charges, the press, the long legal road ahead. Then Boyd and Chen left. Dr. Ningguan remained a moment longer. He'll need therapy, likely for years. The trauma, the loss, the isolation. It's a lot, but people do recover, not to who they were, but to something new, something strong. After she left, Vera sat in the quiet room. Benjamin's eyes were open now, still distant, still fixed on the ceiling. She thought about every mountain he'd climbed, every risk he'd embraced, all the freedom he once lived for. Would he ever trust the world again? Then in a voice so faint she almost didn't hear it. Or Miles. Vera froze. His lips had moved. Miles, Her throat closed. How do you tell someone that their best friend died trying to protect them? She reached for his hand. He's gone, Ben. I'm so sorry. A single tear slid from the corner of his eye, but his hand tightened around hers. It was small, but it was something. It was the start